Chapter 7, The Sugar Barrel. Don't forget to ask your question before you read. Henry Brown was a grown man when he sent himself to freedom, but many runaway slaves were very young, hardly more than children. Here is Caroline Quall's story. On July the 4th, 1842, everyone in St. Louis, Missouri was celebrating Independence Day. There were picnics and parades all over town, but 16-year-old Caroline Qualls was too busy to join the fun. Caroline took all the money she had and a box of clothes. She was headed for the Mississippi River. She was running to freedom. The streets were crowded. She had to avoid horses and people on her way to the docks. Caroline tried to blend in with the crowd. With her light skin and hair, she hoped to pass for white. At the docks, she saw many riverboats on the busy river. Caroline paid a few dollars for a ticket on one. It took her across the river to the free state of Illinois. There she rode in a stagecoach to the very last stop on the stagecoach line. She ended up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She was now 400 miles away from her master, Charles Hall. She believed she was safe. Milwaukee was home to many free blacks and former slaves. Caroline met a barber who seemed nice and offered her a place to stay. Caroline took him up on it. She was scared because even here in Milwaukee, there were posters offering a reward for her capture. $300 was a lot of money. Although the barber had been a slave once himself, he couldn't stop thinking about the money. It would make him a rich man. The barber ended up telling slave catchers where to find Caroline. Caroline was still hidden in the barber's shack. She did not know what he'd done. When she heard a knock on the door, she opened it. Was it a slave catcher? No. There stood Asahel Finch. He was a white man and an abolitionist. He'd heard about the slave catchers coming after Caroline and wanted to warn her. Caroline fled just in time. A few minutes later, the barber returned with slave catchers. The slave catchers were furious that Caroline was gone. They gave the barber a beating. Then they went from house to house looking for the girl. Meanwhile, Caroline and Asahel Finch were heading to the river. They crawled through the brush and the weeds, but they knew they would soon be discovered. Caroline and Finch both spotted an old barrel for storing sugar. It was almost covered by weeds. Finch pried off the lid. Caroline jumped inside. Once the barrel was shut, Finch ran off, promising to come back. For hours, Caroline remained stuffed in the barrel. It was hot, cramped, and dark. Late in the night, Caroline heard a voice. Someone was here. Was it a slave catcher? How frightened she must have been. When the lid was pried off, there was Finch again. What a relief. Finch took Caroline to a safe house, a farm just outside of Milwaukee. Then the other conductors took her to another safe house, 30 miles away. It belonged to Samuel and Lucinda Daugherty. Caroline hid there for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, slave catchers had not given up looking for her. They set up headquarters in a local tavern. From there, they continued to search. The slave catchers were sneaky. They told people that they wanted to help Caroline by sending her home, and that if she gave herself up, they would give her her freedom papers. But these were all lies. Caroline stayed hidden in the Daugherty's house. One day, the slave catchers showed up at the Daugherty's. Caroline ran to the cellar. The only way out was through a potato chute. The chute was slippery and narrow. With her long skirt and petticoat, she barely fit, but she squeezed in and climbed up it. Once she was outside, she crawled on her knees through a cornfield and hid. The slave catchers looked everywhere, but did not find her. When it was dark, they left. Caroline was safe, at least for the time being. But she realized that she would never really be free anywhere in the United States. There was always the chance of being caught. She had to get to Canada. Of course, getting to Canada was not going to be easy. Most escaped slaves made the trip by ship, but there were too many slave catchers looking for her. The docks around Milwaukee and Kenosha were not safe. Again, 2 brave conductors came to Caroline's aid. One was named Lyman Goodnow. He decided to take Caroline to Canada himself. He told people he was going to pay the Queen a visit. That was code for Canada, which was still ruled by Queen Victoria of England. With a pillowcase of food and a little money, they set off in a horse and wagon with Caroline hidden under hay and a buffalo robe. First, they went south to Illinois around Chicago. Then they went through Indiana and up through Michigan. Along the way, they stayed at different stops on the Underground Railroad. Some were very grand houses. Others were tiny shacks. They got wet. They got lost. They were often hungry and tired. They were always afraid of being caught, but they kept traveling for 500 miles. Finally, they reached the Detroit River in Michigan. Posters advertising a reward for Caroline's capture was there too. Slave catchers roamed the docks. Nevertheless, Caroline managed to cross the river in a ferry boat. When she stepped off on the other side, she was in Sandwich, Canada, free. She could hardly believe it. She'd been on the run from July through October of 1842, 4 months. She had come more than 1,000 miles. And this shows her route from Milwaukee through Illinois and Indiana and Michigan all the way to Sandwich, Canada. Caroline Quarles lived in Canada for the rest of her life. She married Alan Watkins and had 6 children. She learned to read and write. Years later, in 1880, she wrote these words to her old friend Lyman. "Dearest friend, pen and ink could hardly express my joy when I heard from you once more. I have never forgotten you nor your kindness. Just as soon as the postmaster read the name to me, your name, my heart filled with joy and gladness. The girl who once hid in a sugar barrel had a sweet ending to her journey on the Underground Railroad."